Hello and welcome to Sticky from the Inside, the employee engagement podcast that looks at how to build stickier, competition-smashing, consistently successful organisations from the inside out. I'm your host, Andy Goram, and I'm on a mission to help more businesses turn the lights on behind the eyes of their employees, light the fires within them, and create tons more success for everyone. This podcast is for all those who believe that's something worth going after and would like a little help and guidance in achieving that. Each episode, we dive into the topics that can help create what I call stickier businesses. The sort of businesses where people thrive and love to work, and where more customers stay with you and recommend you to others because they love what you do and why you do it. So, if you want to take the tricky out of being sticky, listen on. Okay then, today we've got what I think will be a truly thought-provoking and inspiring conversation lined up for you. Today in Sticky Studios, I'm delighted to have with me Dan Tocchini, and he's a leadership coach and founder of Take New Ground, who's been transforming the way people think about leadership, vision, and personal growth. Now, Dan believes that effective leadership isn't just about the position that you hold, but about the vision that you carry and the way you handle the inevitable challenges that you're going to meet along the way. And based on a very special email I received from Dan, we're going to explore a powerful concept that I think might just change the way you approach both your personal and your professional life. So think about this for a sec. What if true happiness and success aren't found by avoiding discomfort, but by embracing it? What if the very suffering we try and escape is actually the doorway to deeper wisdom, stronger relationships, and ultimately enables the ability to create something truly beautiful out of madness and chaos? Now, with Dan's help, I reckon we'll take a journey through these ideas, sharing how a person with a vision can totally transcend their circumstances if they can embrace the concept of exile, and why that exile might actually just be the key to becoming the leader and person you're meant to be. We'll also discuss, I think, how standing and taking this space allows us to properly break free from, traditional codependency, really meet others where they are and connect with them in ways that are properly authentic and powerful. So, if you're ready to rethink what it means to lead, to suffer, and to thrive, stick around, because I think this episode is going to challenge, inspire, and maybe even transform the way you see your own journey. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Oh, thanks for having me, Andy. I've been looking forward to this for some time.
Well, me too. And I want to discuss this email in a second, but before I do, because I won't stop once we start getting into all of that stuff, my friend, do me a favor for the listeners. Just give us a little bit of a brief background into you, what you've been up to, what you focus on today.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I am a consultant, basically. Coaching is something I do as part of it. And given that when you say you're a coach, that could mean so many different things. We're very specific about what that means with our clients. But we basically deal with three areas where leaders get stuck. One is transition, or is basically dysfunctional team stuff like silos, that kind of thing. Uh-huh. Another is transitions, like post and pre-merger transitions. Any time you're going to shift a leadership, make a leadership shift, what are the things you need to be aware of? How can you actually have it work in your favor? And what's it take? What are the conversations that are going to come up in the culture that are going to be, that either going to contribute to or take away from the performance of the team and the meaning of being on a team? And a lot of times leaders don't want to face those kinds of issues. Mm-hmm. And the third one's just performance management. Like, most people have KPIs and that kind of stuff, and rocks, etc., but they don't know how to have the conversations, or they don't want to have the difficult conversations that inevitably arise when you're working with somebody's performance. And how do you have those obstacles to actually become possibilities? That's what we do. I grew up as an entrepreneur. I have multiple businesses. My grandfather came over from the old country in the early 19, at the turn of the century, 1900s, and opened up grocery stores, and that became movie theaters. And I grew up in the movie theater business, and my father had theaters and that kind of thing. And I ended up starting that way, and then branched out, bought real estate, was in the shipping business, have a tech company, that kind of stuff. So
I love that. This part-time gig I have of doing a podcast, I get to meet so many amazing people, and it never surprises me that there's always connections between people you've never met before, things they've done, and things that happen in your life. My late granddad, God bless him, he's in the movie business, but in the cinema side. He ran like the Empire, Leicester Square, and the Curzon in London and stuff. And I remember as a kid going to the back behind
yeah,
the cinema, right,
yeah,
where all the cameras were and everything. Wow, absolutely amazing stuff,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's
And then
great
when
to
I
hear
say
that.
movies, I mean
Yeah,
cinemas.
yeah,
My
yeah.
dad has about 200 screens up and down the West Coast. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Now listen, your background, your background has to have an element of philosophy in there as well, because I'm going to talk about this email in a second, my friend, because this was no ordinary email that I received from you. Just trying to bring the listeners in. So I have a process when we do this podcast. I really like to try and meet my guests before we come on and chat, just so we get a bit better acquainted. Have a little bit of a chat about what we'd like to talk about. Inevitably, sometimes that chat turns into another episode, but sometimes diaries don't always match up. So sometimes there's a bit of an exchange on email or what have you as to, what we might want to talk about. And well, firstly, before I get to that email, there is philosophy in your background, right?
Oh yes. So as a young man, I went through I came out of a pretty traumatic background. My mother was schizophrenic and bipolar, and I became the go-between at a young age. I'm the oldest between her and the psychologist. So
Wow.
pretty traumatic upbringing. And right out of high school, I had some, college offers to play baseball and football. I went and tried to play football. I got hurt. Uh, Parents split up and divorced at 18. Just a lot of craziness, and eventually just got deep into cocaine. And
Wow.
I've been clean now 41 years. But when my son was born, that's when my wife just came to me and said, "Look, if you want us, you got to stop this. I know what you're doing." I was living, I thought, a double life,
Yeah.
and she was hip to it, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. But coming out of it, got very involved with recovery, and then found that the psychological approaches weren't as effective as things like the inventories you take with AA or CA. And I really got into understanding that, and ended up, my dad enrolled me in a human potential movement training called LifeSpring. And I went to work with them eventually. My dad said, "You're going to love this. You know, you're an entrepreneur, but you're also a priest. You should go do this." Well, why I went to work there, I ended up going to work there at a young age. I think I was 24, 25, maybe 26. And I started going back to school, and I started studying phenomenology at Berkeley. I under a guy named Hubert Dreyfus, and it was part of a work extension program, and got deep into it over the years, and found that phenomenology just means the study of human becoming, how people become who they become.
Right.
Like if you want bringing a vision into reality, but around who you are, right? And of course, if you were a cocaine addict and dysfunctional, you're looking to become something that's going to be, you can grow a family out of, and not some dysfunctional mess.
Yeah.
So I got deeply into that, and then later on, I think in the late 90s, I started studying neuroscience, and I started to see how phenomenology, which is 100 years old, maybe 150 years old, was really closely it was describing things that neuroscience was discovering.
Yeah.
And so, like, for instance, you and I, if our current state, the way we show up, our spirit, our attitude, is a result of the future you think is coming. Most people think it's a result of the past, which is an etiological view. That's a Freudian view. And it's very interesting to note that even in the School of Psychology, the Vienna School of Psychology, which is Freud, Jung, and Adler,
Mm.
Adler and Freud were at each other all the time because Freud was so anchored into past, and Adler was a phenomenologist, which I didn't know till later when I started reading his story. So he didn't write as prolifically as Freud did, and Jung was kind of between them, with his typology and archetypes and that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and dream thinking, which are really beautiful stuff. And of course, all three of them were brilliant. But Adler believed that it was the future. The future you thought you're going to have will determine your state. So one way to think about that is if you and I are chatting and you think you're going to double your income this year, like you believe it, and I believe I'm going to half my income, we're going to have very different ways of being or states of being in that moment because of the future we think is coming. And so rather than using the past as a guide or as a marker, and that doesn't mean you don't have the past, you don't look at the past for lessons and so on, but guiding this, see, well, where am I now? Okay, I look into the future. If I can really identify the future I'm committed to, then that becomes my standard, rather than I want to do better than I did before, because if what I did before didn't work well, I want to, well, what future do I want? And then I want to relate how I'm with you and how I'm impacting you with that future. And that requires some real nuances, but that's kind of the simplistic, in a nutshell, difference between a psychological point of view and a phenomenological point of view.
Right. Now, me knowing that and knowing that about you helps me make more sense of the email that I got from you than I did initially, because I had one of those kind of mind blown moments when I read the email and I was like, what? I need to understand this. And so I'd asked broadly, because we'd had a previous conversation on the Engage for Success radio show, right? And we had a connection, and we're like, let's talk a little bit further about this in more detail. And we got this email back. I want to read this email to you because I think in today's episode, I want to break down what I've interpreted, the kind of 4 or 5 pieces that I took out of this email.
Sure.
When I read this email, I thought it was some sort of philosophy poem that had come through, right? And that may just be my inability to read stuff properly. But Henny, look, here it is. This is literally, listeners, what I got back. A person with a vision is never held hostage by history or circumstance. Want to be happy? Learn to suffer for your vision. Suffering introduces us to exile. Exile introduces us to wisdom if we allow ourselves to belong to the exile. Belonging to exile opens the ways to others. Where we stand in exile, we can meet others not only just to belong to what they do for us, but to stand in order of chaos and release beauty.
To stand to order chaos and release beauty.
There we go. Now, picture my little addled brain at that point going, I need, wow, where's this conversation going to go? So the way I interpret that, I loved it. I thought that was about the most profound email I've received, but it covered to me an exploration of leadership, vision, and personal growth, and the sort of interplay between, I mean, I really want to dig into this, suffering, exile, and what that means. And then I guess the pursuit of and ownership of and use of wisdom, and still being out and using all those things to really authentically connect with your people. I mean, that's the sort of key bits I took out of that email.
Yeah.
Have I interpreted things? Have I missed anything in that?
No, I think that's really thorough. If I just put it in normal conversation, it's like, look, I deal with some really heavyweight leaders, right?
Yeah.
And so they want to produce results. That's what we're about, is producing results. but they want meaning. And it's really interesting because I don't think a lot of people connect where meaning is in an organization where you're committed to producing results. That what I put out there are the principles I think or view something from, and invite leaders to into the same conversation. We did a turnaround some 14, 15 years ago with an organization, and the CEO, she's amazing gal. She broke the record on Wall Street with a number of roll-ups, 61 roll-ups in a year. She took a company, a $3 million a year revenue of a package delivery company in New York, rolled up multiple other companies like it, and sold it for 250 million 4 or 5 years later.
Wow.
So she hired me to come in and do a turnaround right after the dot-com bubble burst. Anyway, when I started talking about what I was going to do, because she was really up against it, her partner's from England. He grew up in Africa. I forgot which country, but he was going to have to go back to England because she was thinking about dissolving this current company she had started, and she was worried that they weren't going to be able to make it. The VC firm that had given them the money took a flyer on like a tech play. They were in the BIOS, kind of biotech field, and now the dot-com bubble was burst, and they wanted to dissolve the company and close the tranche. And we were able to turn that around. But when I first started talking to her, she said, "I know you're making sense, but it sounds like Chinese to me." And I said, "That's all right. This is because you're used to listening differently. Within a few months, you're going to catch this." And now she's one of our biggest advocates, right? But because a lot of people are afraid, well, you're going to get into some philosophical conversation. No, actually, I'm going to use the philosophical thinking to have very difficult conversations that are going to produce meaning and productivity. Those are the meaningful productivity. Because that's what keeps people in the game. That's what they want. They want to overcome something they initially may think, there's no way we're going to overcome it. They want to accomplish what they didn't think was possible, but longed for. And if we can work with people in a way that they can come together like that, synergize their efforts, etc., it's a big pop. Everybody knows that. But how do you navigate? Because there is human psychology in this. How do you navigate and create a language, a narrative that can help people handle whatever psychological issues emerge when you get up against circumstance? So when somebody commits to do something, the minute they make a commitment to do something specific and put out a deliverable, there's a crisis. That's a crisis. And the beautiful thing about crisis is it reveals. And most people want to hide from the crisis, which keeps them from embracing the revelation that the crisis is bringing. Like it's a very stoic point of view. It's the obstacle is the way. So, there's a difference between what's actually happening and what you are making up about what's happening. And so when we state the crisis, when we state the commitment, the crisis comes up, and now we can start to explore, intervene, stand with, however you want to put it, whatever phrase, with whatever they're thinking about the crisis. And whatever they're thinking about the crisis is how they're going to behave. So if my thought is, this is going to destroy my career, I need to get out of this, there's a whole different set of pathologies that emerge than if somebody says, okay, got it. I can't wait. We're going to solve this. I don't know how. And they start to resource the team to do that, and themselves and circumstances. They start to, because they're clearly committed to having something turn out. Think Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, anybody who's accomplished anything great. They just have an ability to marshal their energy to find the possibility and resource that exists in the moment that is relevant to the vision.
I want us to try and break down, I think, into those elements of vision, suffering, exile and wisdom, and authentic connection if we can. So
sure.
You've mentioned this: a person with a vision is never held hostage by history or circumstance. So what's your meaning behind that, the importance of that vision, and where have you evidenced that in your work, my friend?
Okay, so All right. So vision comes from one of two things. It either comes from a wound, something you've lost and mourned, and that you face the mourning in such a way that it ignites a desire for it. So I have a very strong family now, but when I was a cocaine addict, I was in the midst of a family that's fallen apart.
Mhm.
And I was the oldest, and I think the divorce really affected me deeply. So the addiction was trying to get away from that exile, that sense of not belonging, that sense of being cut off, that sense of being alone, looking for my tribe. And so the addiction would numb that hole, if you will, metaphorically speaking, that
Yeah.
sense of loss. So by facing into that, that's how I recovered from the addiction. The desire for family grew in me huge. I want family. That's why I'm hurting because I don't think it's possible. So why look into it? So now I create basically like a prison. And I've done a lot of work. I have a curriculum I developed. One of them, it's the most studied curriculum for kids coming out of gang in America. I went and trained and implemented it with an organization called Straight Ahead Ministries on the East Coast. And this was many years ago. And it was just something I do to give back because I came out, I was involved in the street quite a bit, given my home life.
Yeah.
And so kids in prison, anybody in prison doesn't want to talk about what the future they want because they don't think it's going to happen. So why talk about it? In fact, they get pissed off. And the other thing is they don't want to talk about anything they care about, because if people know what you care about, they could use it against you. They could attack what you care about. So that tendency is not just with guys in prison. That's a human reaction, a survival reaction: fight, flight, follow, fool, or freeze. If I'm not aware of that, I will begin to pull away from the very things I long for. Right. So it takes courage to transform from a reaction machine to a legacy, what I call a legacy machine, or somebody who can order chaos. I can stand and the chaos starts to order. That's what a leader does.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like a personality type. You can be introverted, extroverted, but it's the willingness to stand and keep your eye on the vision and continue to create narratives that invite people into it. So you can identify who's on the team that's going to be beneficial based on the vision, who's going to get value from going after that vision, from standing for that vision, and those who aren't. And those are the people you got to pay attention to those. So you got to be clear about the future worth having. That's like, what future are we going to have together? And what are we committed to? And that we don't have it yet.
The bit about being held hostage, right, or circumstance, is it because people aren't looking far enough ahead? It isn't a big enough kind of picture. It's too close to reality. What's the defining factor here?
Well, I think that's a great question. Well, what I think is that when the people you fail, we were talking about this earlier. We fail more than we succeed. If you play golf, and I play a lot of golf, I love it because it's a game that you're going to fail far more than you succeed often, and you've got to deal with those failures. And if you don't face those failures, you're going to get pissed off and walk off the course, or it's going to go sideways some way, and nobody's going to want to play with you, right? That kind of thing. Well, life is like that. I think, one of the biggest things we tackle in my business with executives is apathy or cynicism, because they failed enough, and rather than go after what they really want, they go after what they know they can get.
Right.
And that's a state of despair. It doesn't know itself as despair, but it finds a level of that state of despair is what Kierkegaard says, the most pernicious despair for human beings is the despair that they can tolerate, and they call that happiness, right? Because they don't want to put themselves at stake. Because the minute you get at stake for something you care about, you come alive because something could be taken from you. And rather than feel the disappointment of not succeeding, most people will mitigate that vision down to something they know they can get. And so when they accomplish it, doesn't bring that juice that when you accomplish something you didn't quite know it's possible brings, like that.
I absolutely love that. the vision that I know I can get. I mean, that just makes
Yeah,
so much sense. I just think that then that piece around relative happiness
yeah,
in light of that, I mean, that makes so much sense. It was sort of
yeah,
settling on all fronts,
yeah.
settling for the vision that I know I can get, settling for the relative happiness, right?
That's the default future. You're going to have it anyway. It's going to come. You know it's going to come. That's the default future. And if you don't make any shifts, that's the future you're going to have. You get into a company, you're making big money, you got VCs, you got a board, you got all this stuff going on. It's very easy to react to those pressures in a way that you find that default future and that's all you play. And what happens is you lose the people who are really talented. This is what I love about Elon Musk. I've done work with his companies and the people that have worked with him very closely. Tom Mueller, who was number one employee for 18 years, he invented the rockets, was one of my clients. And these guys are really exceptional people because Musk talks in his life story, talks about this guy, Tom Mueller. He wasn't the best or brightest of all the engineers he talked to, but the guy never gave up. He was willing to go after what he didn't think he could accomplish. And that's the guy who put together and came up with this incredible rocket system. It's the most successful rocket ever created. And this guy, Tom Mueller, was really the guy behind it. And I had the privilege of coaching this guy for a while. He is a remarkable guy. But, he says, Elon just doesn't give up.
Yeah.
And if you weren't willing to do that, if you kept trying to tell him it was impossible, well, he'd take you off the team. It's like, you're out. I don't want to hear that.
Yeah, real commitment and resilience to that. I wanna move into the happiness thing, which is kind of related to this thing about suffering. I mean, you mentioned to be happy, you've got to learn to suffer for this vision. And so, I mean, I think we're just starting to sort of hear about that, what the sort of commitment it takes, and I guess the pain in going after something. But just dig into that suffering thing for me.
I will tell you a personal story.
Great.
About 2 years ago, not quite. My 2.5-year-old grandson was killed instantly in his house. A redwood fell in his house, almost killed my son, blew my son out of the house, and killed my grandson instantly.
Oh, Dad.
And it was an incredible. Just the character my son has is he couldn't get of course, the tree off his boy. He tried to get a truck and he wrecked the truck trying to push the tree off. It wouldn't move it. So he got a neighbor and they sawed both sides of the tree, took it off, rolled it off him. And my son's, Eon was my son's son, and Eon there was no blood, nothing. He was on the couch, and I guess it just killed him instantly. But his body was intact and just a little bruise, and that was it. My boy carried him to the EMTs, and it was incredible. And that event was probably it's. My son said to me, "I'm so glad I'll never forget this. You're my father, because you taught me to look into the abyss until I see possibility, till I see Christ, because we're believers, till I see Jesus." We spent 2 months together, our whole family, my son, his ex-wife, her fiance, his kids by her, his wife, the wife who gave birth to Eon, my daughter, her husband, her kids, my wife, and we spent 2 months in a rental and just looked into the abyss. The rules were simple. If you didn't want to talk, no problem. When you want to talk, great. If you want to cry, you cry. If you're angry, you're angry. Whatever comes up, we just look into it. We're there. We're there to hold it. And what came out of that, it was the deepest connection I've ever had. And the meaning of Eon's life took on a whole new level for us, right? And we started to realize how the paradox of such a tragedy is that there's something in there that God's doing in the tragedy. Not that he caused the tragedy, but in the tragedy, there was a connection that we had never experienced. And I have found that to be true in every business I've ever been in, that if I can open-handedly, and I've blown it, I know about what downside is because when I was a young man, I shattered a company because I was unwilling to have the hard conversations I needed to have about the way where I had completed what I wanted to do. I'd worked in this company for 18 years or so that I started. I wanted to get out of the company. I could have, instead I tried to be some noble guy doing the right thing for everybody working for me instead of just being straight about I'm done and figuring out a way for them to either take the company, to sell it to them, or to sell it to somebody else. I didn't do that, and it really hurt other people. And I, in a very obfuscated way, I was lying to them
Yeah.
because I was trying to be something. I was trying to be somewhere I really wasn't committed to being. And so at that point, I started to learn, you know what, I need to have the conversation anyway. And if I hold into the conversation, if I look into that abyss, because I don't know where, the suffering of not knowing, of not really being clear, but I know this isn't what I want, and getting clear about what I want, bringing that to the table uh, is a big deal. And the knowing who to bring it to, I have a very clear framework now of how to have those conversations, and so that we can explore and make them purposeful. That was all something I explored as I made that correction after I blew that company up. And so that led me to teaching my children the same thing. And so when this occurred, automatically we were there in a day. Boom, everybody was on top of it. And we helped, we did, we just took care of the funeral and everything that went around it, and brought our family in, and it worked out powerfully. Well, that's no different than when a company changes leadership, or you're going to make cuts and people are going to be leaving. There's a mourning that goes on.
Yeah.
And leaders want to go, well, that's going to get in the way of business. No, actually, that's going to deepen the sense of purpose if you do this, and like you get vulnerable about what you're up to, and why you're choosing to make this decision. It may not be the right choice, but to you got to be true to your conscience and stand. And I think in this world that we live in, people get way too political and try to, you certainly don't want to be cavalier or anything like that, but you want to have an authentic conversation. And most people don't spend enough time preparing for for conversations. And so they go in and wing it, and they incur damage they didn't need to, suffering that was unnecessary. So that's one of just the fear of that is enough to get you for me to sit down and prepare for the conversation. So the suffering is the minute something doesn't go the way you think it ought to, you start the suffering.
Yeah.
Right. The minute something happens that, when the plan meets reality, that's when you find out what you're made of, because plans never do well in reality, or at least they generally don't. If you might get lucky once in a while, but generally you're going to be making shifts.
Yeah. I mean, Dan, I don't really know what to say, my friend. I mean, firstly, thank you so much for sharing that very, very personal story. And the way you kind of relate that back to businesses and lessons that you've taught your children. I mean, there are, I don't think, any greater examples of leaning into something so uncomfortable and trying to find the pathway through it. It's cliche to say we never grow when we're comfy, but that's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, I have to be honest with you. The thought of what would occur if I didn't do that was more frightening than that.
Yeah.
And I think that's when we talk about vision, the second part of vision is current reality. Most people don't want to look at current reality because it's not at the vision level, but it's vision, the provision, the things for the vision are in the current reality, particularly the areas you don't want to look into. And what you're unwilling to face will eventually defeat you.
Yeah.
So, that's how I define the fear of God.
Yeah.
It's like, we're set up in a universe, in a reality that you do reap what you sow, karma, reap what you sow, whatever you want to say, action, reaction. If you're not willing to face something, it will eventually come up and it will defeat you because it creates a blind spot and you're not prepared for what's wanted and needed to provide it. So you'll shy away from it, and then it starts to encroach on you, and you become a reaction instead of a stand. If that makes sense.
It does. It does make sense, mate. My head is racing. I'll be honest with you. My head is racing with lots of things that you're saying and things I'm thinking. And I'm trying. I'm trying to stick with where I want to go. Because you're making me think so many things. No, you must never apologize, because this is kind of what I expected in you coming on this show, and why I was so keen to speak to you, because in the brief moments I've had with you, you just make me think about things. And sometimes that's a good thing, right? But like the suffering, sometimes that could be a scary thing. And I try to maintain the position of a host here and not dig into all the dark stuff I need to deal with. But if we think about the rest of this, I'm calling it the philosophy that you've kind of shared with me on that email. I'm really curious to understand this perspective of, or the link between exile and wisdom that you talk about. So we've talked about having this vision that we're not settling for, that's something out there. We're talking about leaning into the dark stuff that's going to trip us up. And there we're talking about maybe taking a stand in exile to get some wisdom. Explain that to me.
So I'll put it in a business context.
Yes, please.
So the gal I was talking about, who she bought this concierge company because it was the concierge company that basically developed the black card. And before she bought it, the CEO had embezzled $1 million, and so Amex let them go. So she picked it up and was going to do a tech play with it. And we got into it. We raised money, got the VCs in a position, restructured $13.5 million in debt down to 1.5.
Wow.
There was all these things we did that really got this thing going. And we had a plan. And the plan was to be the first concierge company with a global footprint, which she accomplished. But in the middle of it, we had some failures. I'll never forget. We had this failure, had to do with Google. I won't get too much into it. Google's not they don't play well with others.
No, I bet they don't.
So we're in the middle of this upset, and it looks like it could break the company. It's that kind of upset. It's a few $1 million, but when you're only at the time, we took the company from about $4 or $5 million gross revenues a year up to about 14 million in 5 years, and ended up selling the company for around 60 million, 70 million. But at this point, we're looking at death.
Yeah.
And God bless this woman. She had put everything she had into this thing. And now she's teetering on death, and she just disappears. Oof. And I know what I know her. We've become good friends. And I love this woman so much, because she's just got big gonads. I mean, but now she's terrified. She could lose everything that she had in this. Her partner might have to go back to England and all kinds of stuff. And so I know she's at home in her room, and she's either drinking wine or just trying to avoid what's going on. So I go to her house. Now, in my mind, I'm going, if I do this is going to piss her off. But if I don't do it, the vision goes down.
Yeah.
So she's in exile.
Yeah.
Right. And what most people want to do in exile when something doesn't go that you care about, go the way you want it to, the first thing you want to do is hide. You nobody can say anything that can make you feel better. You're in exile. It's like people are talking to you, you're disconnected, you don't know what to say. Whatever you say isn't enough. You feel the despair. There's no possibility. People get it. It's just a human state. It's just part of humanity.
Yeah.
And so I go to her house and I start throwing rocks in her window. I'm not leaving till you talk to me. At least talk to me. Right? And she let me in. And I said, just tell me what's up. And she goes, I don't want to. I said, no, let's just look into this thing. Let's talk about the worst case scenario. Because if you can get people to voluntarily look into the worst case scenario, they'll start and then say, okay, now let's say that happened. I mean, I want you to think dark, the worst you could think. I mean, I kept prodding her on, and she's getting depressed, and she's crying, and she's upset, she gets angry, she goes to the bathroom once she would come out. I'm not coming out. I don't want to talk about this. No, come on out. Let's keep doing this. Well, what happens psychologically, neurologically, this is actually a neuroscientific fact. If somebody willfully, they have to be willful, you can't force people to do this or to cause trauma. But if they willfully look into what they fear most, they'll break through. They'll see, as they see what they can do, the things they can do that they never thought of, they start to get wiser about how to stand. And as soon as somebody sees other possibilities, the passion to go again starts to come up because they care about what's there. But the fear of loss is what causes people to go into apathy.
Mm.
They want to play not to lose. And this is the biggest thing we have in our business to overcome with our clients is that most experienced CEOs will tell you the way that it is. And the minute they tell me that, I go, okay, you're in despair.
Yeah.
And when I tell them that, they go, what do you I'm a multimillionaire. No, you're in despair, pal. You just don't know it. Right. Because and when we get in that discussion, I just did this with a PE firm, and it really got their attention. It really got their attention because after they argued with me for a while and I just kept asking questions, they started realizing, I go, you're upset with this. They have multiple businesses in their portfolio, and they were naming 2 or 3 that they really couldn't stand. And I said, you're upset with them because they're not going after what they said they're committed to, but you're not willing to go after with them what you were committed to because you're afraid you could lose more. So you're now in a state of playing not to lose, and that is despair.
That's settling again on both sides, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And nobody, it's not like you handle this once. This, you want to get familiar with this machinery in you so it becomes an ally. It's not an enemy. Most people think that's why I don't like personal growth kind of stuff. And you don't have to get rid of anything. In fact, everything that goes on in your body, the things that have sabotaged you are actually, you know what they are as an enemy. But if you can get really familiar with them as an enemy, they become an ally. Because when they come up, they tell you about your blind spot, and then you can look into the blind spot and inquire what you would normally run from. And that's what produces the wisdom.
And this is where I think we now get to, right? Because this is all beginning to make far, far more sense to me listening to you. And we come to this final part, I guess, of the breakdown into making authentic connection with people. And the way that I'm interpreting this is, I think much like why I know I have a connection with you because of how you make me feel and how you make me think and the conviction that you have in what you do and how you help people. This is where the authentic connection thing comes from, right? Stemming from that vision you're not settling for, having the conversations or the actions around the dark stuff to really get into it and face into it and make progress and challenge yourself in those difficult situations to bring good stuff out. If you're the people see you like that, they want to come with you, right?
Well, they do. The ones who don't, it's okay. They got somewhere else to go.
Yeah.
But the ones, and the thing is, you're challenging your thoughts. You know that saying, don't believe everything you think and feel.
Mm.
If you can see it, if you can observe it, it isn't you. You're the observer. So if I'm feeling a certain way and I don't have to I don't have to believe it in a way that it takes me away. It takes my agency away. I can look at it. I can experience it. I can let the experience speak to me. One of the things we talk about is what if emotions are thoughts trapped in the body looking for language? And if once you find language, you set free what the emotions are trying to tell you. You have that as an articulate, you have a narrative that you can invite other people into to help you work through, think about, invent, brainstorm, whatever you want to do.
Is it, do you think, in your experience, that whether it's a physical or a mental connection, but that commitment piece, that belief and resilience, the things you've talked about in some of the characteristics of the people you've mentioned in your stories, is that one of those connectors for connection? Are those just things that bring us in?
Oh yeah, if you think about it, we connect in the tough times. That's where people connect.
Mm.
And if you can be with somebody when they're upset and still be for them and not be offended by it and still intervene and connect with their suffering. First, if they see you connect with what they're up to. In other words, you're not offended by it and you're not trying to change it. You just want to understand it. You want to connect to it. when they see that, they'll unplug. Their emotional state will go at least half. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
now there's margin to invent narrative, to go deeper into where the possibility is, which is in, it's like the Joseph Campbell thing. The treasure you're looking for is in the cave you don't want to go into. You've got if you're not willing to go into those caves, they will eventually, something's going to come out of them that's going to defeat you. So,
I mean, that is a great summary of this whole thing, I think.
that's
I
right.
think today. Great summary of this whole thing.
If you're an entrepreneur, you better be a knight. You better, or a queen. You better be somebody who's courageous enough to look into the things that nobody else wants to look into, because that's where you're going to find the next possibility. And that's what was beautiful about, if you read Jobs' life and the way he progressed and how he evolved, just beautiful. I mean, the guy just kept, even into his own faults, how he lost Apple and what he did with Scully. He looked into his own demons, and it educated him. It educated him. That takes a lot of courage, man.
I mean, the whole thing takes courage, right? I mean, you've got to be willing to go over the top to get people to come over the top with you, I think,
Right on. Yeah.
I just blinking knew this was going to happen. We have got to the part of the show, Dan, that I blatantly call sticky notes, right? Which is an attempt to summarize. I'm laughing. In an attempt to summarize all the things that we've talked about in today's episode, what would you leave behind on your 3 sticky notes, Dan? What do you think?
All right. I'm going to say these in a little different language. Number 1, you got to master yourself before you can lead others well. And if you do that, you'll create breakthrough results. Have a vision, like we talked about, worth standing for, which means you don't have to worry about being disciplined, because fascination is the true and proper mother of discipline. If you get fascinated with something that you're committed to with your team, the disciplines will emerge because of the fascination. That's what sustains a vision, is the willingness to be captured by it and fascinated by it. So, and it's proper because it's not forced, and so if it, I don't know if you ever read Big Magic. I forgot the author's name. She's a fantastic gal, but she wrote the Tuscan Sun, and Elizabeth Gilbert. And she said, if you don't court your vision, it will go to somebody else. That's why I say fascination is the true and proper mother of discipline. And then what you refuse to face in that process, just know it will eventually defeat you. And if you stop and think about the ways it could defeat you in the future, you'll get motivated to do something about it, to look into what you're afraid to look into. And the last one is, don't try to explain your way out of what you behaved your way into. It's not going to work. Just look at the results, and that's what you got. And it isn't about you, it's about your vision. So what's about you is you get to be the one who's going to break to have that vision come about. So pay attention to it, because the failures are calling something out of you you've yet been willing to give.
Oh my goodness, Dan. I mean, 3 fantastic sticky notes there, mate. To round off a just fantastic, thought-provoking conversation, a different, in my opinion, more profound look at what really is behind leadership. And I thank you so much for coming on, my friend, and spending some time with us.
Well, I thank you for having me and taking the risk, because you never know what's going to happen.
No risk, no risk in this.
Really enjoy the connection. I hope we stay in touch. I love your podcast. I really do. I've listened to it quite a bit. I put it up there with Chris Williamson and all the other guys I watch. I think you're really authentic and committed to learning, and I learn from listening to you learn. So thank you.
Oh, you're an absolute sweetheart. Thank you so much. Thank you for being so generous in what you share with us today. I really appreciate it. And you have now got me connected for life, my friend. So bad luck on that one.
Well, if you're ever interested, we do a leadership training about 4 times a year called the Revenant Process. And you can find it on our website, takenewground.com, and in the menu. And we have a leadership academy that goes over a 60-day period, and it includes a coaching, certificate and all that. But we train a very specific framework and way of working with people that I talked about here today.
Well, I will make sure all of that stuff goes in the show notes, my friend, so that everybody can find you and find it and benefit from listening and learning about what you say and what you mean and what you're convicted to, because it's a brilliant thing.
Well,
And I can't wait to see you again and speak to you again at some stage.
Same here.
Okay, mate, you take care.
You too. Bless.
Okay, everyone. That was Dan Tocchini. And if you want to find out about the things that we've talked about today, any of the references that Dan's made, just please go ahead and check out the show notes. So, that concludes today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, found it interesting, and heard something maybe that will help you become a stickier, more successful business from the inside going forwards. If you have, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps. I'm Andy Goram, and you've been listening to the Sticky from the Inside podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.